In the summer of 1961, an Italian archaeologist named Antonio Frova was working through the ruins of a Roman theatre on the coast of Caesarea Maritima. The site was not glamorous. It had been picked through for centuries. Stones from its walls had been hauled away by villagers, soldiers and pilgrims, reused in cisterns and house foundations and harbour breakwaters. Frova was not searching for anything connected to the Gospels. He was studying the architectural history of the theatre, trying to understand how the seating tiers had been rebuilt and patched across the late Roman and Byzantine periods. Then he turned over a block. It was limestone, roughly the size of a small writing desk. One face had been smoothed flat, then scratched and chipped where someone, centuries after its first use, had reshaped it as a step. But the other face still carried 4 lines of Latin, partly worn, partly whole. Frova read what he could: a name, a title, a reference to the Emperor Tiberius. He stood there in the dust and read it again. The inscription was a dedication, originally placed on a public building in Caesarea, naming the Roman official who had paid for the project. The name was Pontius Pilatus. The title was Prefect of Judea. It is hard to describe how strange this find was, even to people who had spent their lives working in the soil of the Holy Land. For nearly 2,000 years, the only place this name appeared in writing was in the Gospels, in a brief mention by Josephus, in a sentence from Tacitus, and in a few coins that had circulated during his term of office. Skeptics in the 18th and 19th centuries had argued, with some confidence, that Pilate was a literary character, a figure invented by the early church to give Jesus a Roman judge. The argument was not absurd, given the silence of stone and inscription. The Gospels described a real provincial governor sentencing a real Galilean teacher to death. But the man who supposedly issued that sentence had left no physical trace, until Frova flipped that block. The inscription is short. In English it reads roughly that Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, dedicated something, a Tiberium, a building honoring Tiberius, to the divine emperors. But the smallness of the text is part of its power. This is not a triumphal monument. It is administrative routine, a governor doing what Roman governors did, funding a public structure, putting his name on it, reminding the local population that Rome was watching and Rome was generous. The kind of inscription that was carved by the hundreds across the empire and survived only by accident. There is also a quiet correction tucked inside the limestone. For centuries, Christian tradition had referred to Pilate as a procurator, the title used for governors of Judea later in the 1st century. Tacitus uses that title too, writing nearly a century after the events. But the stone says prefect, prefectus, a military rank used for governors of Judea before the title shifted around the year 44 of the Common Era. The Gospels, when they call Pilate hegemon in Greek, leave the question open. They use a general word for governor. The stone tells us the specific Latin term, and it matches the period exactly. A forger inventing Pilate after the fact would almost certainly have gotten the title wrong. The stone got it right. Caesarea itself adds another layer. Pilate did not live in Jerusalem. He lived in this Mediterranean port city built by Herod the Great, with its artificial harbour and its imported marble and its theatre facing the sea. He came to Jerusalem only for the major festivals, when crowds swelled and unrest could spark. This is exactly the picture the Gospels paint. A Roman official travelling up to the holy city for Passover, lodging in the Praetorium, hearing cases that local authorities pushed onto his desk. The geography in the Gospel narratives is not theological flourish. It is the lived rhythm of a Roman prefect's calendar. Stand for a moment with that limestone block. It was carved by a workman who never imagined his chisel marks would matter. It was knocked down, probably during one of Caesarea's many destructions, and reused by builders who could not read Latin anymore or did not care. It lay face down for who knows how many centuries, protected by its own neglect. And then, in a season of routine excavation, it was turned over. The Pilate Stone does not prove the resurrection. It does not prove the trial happened the way John or Mark describe it. What it does, quietly and stubbornly, is anchor a name. The man who, according to 4 ancient narratives, washed his hands and handed Jesus over to be crucified. That man held a real office, in a real province, under a real emperor, and someone once paid to carve his title into limestone. The Gospels are written into a world that left fingerprints. That is the beginning. One stone, one name, one province. And from here, the ground keeps speaking. Chapter 2. A name carved into bone. The story of the Caiaphas ossuary begins with a road crew, not an archaeologist. In November of 1990, workers were laying a section of road in the Peace Forest, a wooded park on the southern edge of Jerusalem. A bulldozer cut into soft rock, and the ground gave way. Beneath the surface lay a burial cave, cut from the limestone in the 1st century, sealed and forgotten for nearly 2,000 years. Inside were 12 ossuaries. Stone boxes, the kind used by Jewish families in and around Jerusalem during a roughly 100-year window, from about 20 before the Common Era to about 70 after, when the temple was destroyed and the practice gradually faded. Ossuaries are intimate objects. The body of the deceased was placed in a tomb niche and left to decompose for about a year. Then the family returned, gathered the bones, and placed them in one of these limestone boxes. The boxes were often inscribed with the name of the person whose remains they held, not for display, for the family, so that future generations entering the tomb would know whose bones rested where. Most ossuaries carry simple names: Yehuda, Miriam, Shimon, sometimes a father's name, sometimes a profession. The inscriptions are usually scratched, not carved, by a relative rather than a craftsman. The ossuary that drew the most attention from this tomb was different. It was elaborate, carved with rosettes and decorative borders, the kind of work that took time and money. And on its side, written twice, was a name in Aramaic letters: Yehoseph bar Caiapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. There is a careful argument to be made here, and the people who made it most carefully were not theologians but epigraphers. The name Caiaphas is unusual. It is not common in the Jewish records of the period. Josephus, writing his history of the Jewish war and the Jewish antiquities, mentions a high priest named Joseph, who was called Caiaphas. He served from about the year 18 to about the year 36 of the Common Era. That is an extraordinary tenure for a high priest in this period. Most of his contemporaries lasted only a year or two before being deposed by Roman or royal authority. Caiaphas held the office for 18 years, through 3 different prefects of Judea, including Pilate, through the entire ministry of Jesus. Inside the ornate ossuary were the bones of 6 people: a young child, 2 infants, a teenage boy, an adult woman, and a man of about 60. The osteologist who studied the remains noted nothing dramatic about the man's bones. He had lived a long life by the standards of his time. His teeth were worn but present. His joints showed the wear of age. There was no obvious cause of death. He had died old in a city that had not yet been burned by Titus. Whether those bones are the bones of Caiaphas himself, the high priest who, according to the Gospels, presided over the night session that condemned Jesus, cannot be proven. The ossuary names are Joseph, son of Caiaphas, but the family was a priestly dynasty, and the name could refer to a relative. Some scholars argue confidently that the older man is the high priest. Others urge caution, pointing to the family size and the looseness of inscription practice. What is not in dispute is that this is a Caiaphas family tomb, that the high priest of that name was a real person, and that his bones, or the bones of someone very close to him, lay in a stone box in southern Jerusalem until a bulldozer accidentally opened the door. 18 years in that office is a political fact worth pausing over. Caiaphas was not a religious figurehead alone. He was a man balancing 2 systems that wanted very different things. Rome wanted order, taxes, and quiet. The Jewish population wanted the temple to function, the festivals to be observed, and the high priesthood to be filled by someone who understood the law. Caiaphas managed both for nearly 2 decades. That is the work of a careful operator, someone who had learned how to read a Roman prefect's mood and a Galilean pilgrim crowd in the same week. The Gospel of John records a sentence attributed to him during a meeting of the chief priests. He says in effect that it is better for one man to die than for the whole nation to perish. Read in light of the ossuary, that sentence carries a different texture. It is the calculation of a man whose entire career has been built on knowing exactly how much pressure the system can absorb before Rome reaches for the sword. He had watched Pilate slaughter Galilean pilgrims at a previous festival. He had seen the temple courts cleared by force. When a teacher from Nazareth arrived with crowds shouting messianic acclamations during Passover week, Caiaphas read the situation the way he had been trained to read it. The ossuary itself is now in the Israel Museum. You can stand in front of it. The Aramaic letters are still legible. The rosettes are still sharp. It is a small object, smaller than you would expect, holding the dust of a man who once held the most powerful religious office in Judea. The Gospels name him. The stone confirms him. And between the two, there is a thin, durable thread of historical memory that no one was trying to preserve and that almost did not survive. Chapter 3: 5 Porticos and the Water that Remembered. For most of the modern period, the Gospel of John was treated by certain scholars as the least reliable of the 4 narratives. It was written latest, its language was the most theological, its scenes were the most stylized, and one detail in particular drew skepticism. In the 5th chapter, John describes a healing at a pool in Jerusalem. The pool is called Bethesda, or in some manuscripts Bethsaida or Bethatha, and it is said to have 5 porticos, 5 covered colonnades around its edge, where the sick and the lame waited for the water to be stirred. For a long time, no one could find this pool. 5 porticos did not fit any known Greco-Roman architectural pattern. Pools were typically square or rectangular with 4 sides. The number 5 seemed symbolic, perhaps a literary device pointing to the 5 books of Moses. Critics suggested that the entire scene was a theological invention, that John was constructing a setting rather than describing one. Then, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists working near the Church of St. Anne in the Muslim quarter of the Old City began to uncover something. 2 pools, side by side, separated by a central wall. Around the perimeter of the 2 pools, 4 colonnades, and along the central dividing wall, a 5th, 5 porticos. Exactly as John had described, not a symbol, a floor plan. The pools had served as a public reservoir and possibly as a healing site associated with a pagan cult of Asclepius in the late Roman period, layered on top of an earlier Jewish ritual function. The water was fed by a spring whose flow was uneven, surging at intervals, which explains the Gospel's strange detail about the water being stirred. People with chronic illnesses gathered there because the place had a reputation. The reputation was not invented in the 2nd century by a Gospel writer trying to add color. It was the lived knowledge of Jerusalem residents in the 1st. A short walk south, near the southern end of the original city of David, lies another pool that tells a similar story. The pool of Siloam appears in the Gospel of John as the site of a different healing. A man born blind is told to wash there, and the text mentions in passing that the name Siloam means sent. For centuries, pilgrims were shown a small Byzantine-era pool as the site, and most scholars assumed that the original 1st century pool, if it had existed, was lost. In 2004, workers repairing a sewage line south of the Temple Mount cut into ancient stone steps. The steps led down into a vast pool, not the small Byzantine basin that had been venerated for centuries, but a much larger ritual bath, dating to the late 2nd Temple period, about 50 meters long. Steps on multiple sides, allowing pilgrims to descend into the water for purification. Coins from the period of the Jewish revolt against Rome were found in the plaster, dating its final use to within a few decades of the destruction of the temple in the year 70. This was the pool the Gospel describes, a place where a blind man could plausibly wash, where pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem for the festivals would have purified themselves before climbing up to the temple. The Gospel does not bother to explain its scale or its function, because the audience knew. They had stood on those steps. They had felt the cool water on hot pilgrimage feet. These 2 pools matter for a reason that is easy to miss. The Gospels are often defended on theological grounds and attacked on historical ones. The conversation runs through doctrine and miracle and meaning, but the porticos and the steps belong to a different category of evidence. They are the ordinary furniture of a city. A writer inventing a story decades later, far from Jerusalem, would have had no reason to specify 5 porticos or to send a healed man to a pool whose name carried a particular meaning. These details were not preserved because they were important. They were preserved because they were true. The way a person remembers the layout of a neighborhood they once lived in. There is something else worth noting. The Gospel of John is the latest of the 4. It was likely composed near the end of the 1st century, perhaps in the 90s, in or near Ephesus. By that time, Jerusalem had been destroyed. The temple was rubble. The pools, though some still functioned, were buried under the wreckage of war, and yet the writer remembers them precisely. Either he had been there himself, or he was working from a tradition that had been there. The architecture refuses to dissolve into metaphor. Stand at the edge of the Bethesda excavation today, and the porticos are gone, but the pools remain. Two rectangles cut into stone, deep and dry now, with the broken stumps of columns scattered around their edges. It is not a beautiful sight, it is a working site, a place where water once collected and where people once waited. The Gospel writer saw what you can almost see now. Before time and earth filled in the gaps, the water remembered, and then the earth gave it back. Chapter 4. The House Beneath the House. There is a small village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee called Capernaum. In the 1st century it was a fishing town, modest, maybe 1,500 residents, a customs post on the road that ran from the coast inland toward Damascus, a synagogue, a few public buildings. Most of the houses were single-story constructions of black basalt, the volcanic stone of the region, with floors of beaten earth and roofs of branches and packed mud. The kind of roof you could break through if you needed to lower a paralyzed friend down to a teacher inside. The Gospels mention Capernaum often. Jesus is said to have made it his base during his Galilean ministry. He taught in its synagogue, he healed in its streets. He stayed, according to one tradition, in the house of Simon Peter. When the Gospel of Mark describes a crowd so dense around a doorway that men carrying a paralyzed man had to climb to the roof and dig through it, the house in question is most often associated with Peter's home. In 1968, Franciscan archaeologists began excavating beneath the floor of an octagonal Byzantine church on the Capernaum site. The church had been built in the 5th century. Before that, the same plot of ground had held a 4th century structure called a domus ecclesia, a house turned into a place of worship. And before that, the foundations led back further still, to a simple basalt house of the 1st century, a house that had been continuously venerated, modified, rebuilt around, and protected for nearly 500 years before the octagonal church was finally laid over it. The house itself is unremarkable in design. One main room, roughly 7 meters by 6, with smaller rooms attached, walls of rough basalt stone. The floor was originally beaten earth, but around the late 1st century, that floor was plastered. This is unusual. Domestic floors in Capernaum were not plastered. The room was no longer being used as a kitchen or a sleeping space. Something had changed. By the 2nd century, the plaster had been replastered, and the walls began to carry inscriptions, graffiti scratched into the surface by visitors. The inscriptions are what give the room its voice. There are over 100 of them layered across centuries in 4 languages: Aramaic, Greek, Syriac, Latin. Some are simple, a name, a blessing. Others are explicit. The name Jesus appears repeatedly, sometimes accompanied by titles like Lord Christ the Most High. The name Peter appears as well. There are crosses, there are fish, there are short prayers in Greek asking for mercy. This is what visitor traffic looks like when a site is considered holy. Not a marble shrine, not an inscription commissioned by an emperor, just the marks of ordinary people who came, perhaps from far away, and felt the need to leave a small trace of themselves on a wall they considered sacred. The earliest of these graffiti date to the late 1st or early century, within a generation or two of the events the Gospels describe. What this does not prove is that the house was definitely Peter's. Archaeology rarely deals in certainties of that kind. What it does establish is that within living memory of the 1st century, a particular house in Capernaum was already being treated as a place associated with the early Christian movement, and, specifically, by the language of the inscriptions, with Jesus and Peter. The tradition is old enough that it cannot easily be explained as a later invention. By the time anyone could have invented it, the house was already being venerated. There is a quieter detail that often gets lost: the fish hooks. Excavations of the original floor layer of the house, before the 1st century plastering, turned up domestic objects consistent with a working fisherman's household. Hooks, net weights, the rough tools of a Galilean trade. The Gospels describe Peter as a fisherman from Capernaum. The dirt agrees. A few hundred meters away stands the famous white limestone synagogue of Capernaum, the one tourists photograph. That synagogue dates to the 4th or 5th century, but excavations beneath its floor revealed an earlier black basalt foundation, the foundation of a 1st century synagogue, same basalt as the surrounding houses. The the same period as the village's first-century occupation. This is the synagogue the Gospels refer to, the one where, according to Mark and Luke, Jesus taught, and where his teaching drew amazement because, the texts say, he taught with a different kind of authority than the scribes. Stand in the village ruins now, and the layout makes a small kind of sense. The synagogue and the house are about a minute's walk apart. The shore of the lake is just beyond. A man could leave the synagogue, walk home, find a crowd already gathered at the door, and have his afternoon turn into something he had not planned. The geography of the Gospels is not a stage set. It is a real village with a real distance between its buildings, and the distances are short. Capernaum was abandoned around the 7th century after a series of earthquakes and the shifting trade routes of the early Islamic period. The village simply emptied out. Sand and grass covered the basalt. The plastered house with its graffiti slept under its layers of churches. And then, slowly in the 20th century, hands began to brush it clear. The house beneath the house is not a relic in the medieval sense. It is something stranger, a room that ordinary people decided very early to remember. Chapter 5. A fisherman's boat and a carved stone. The winter of 1985 to 1986 was unusually dry in the Galilee. The lake, which the Gospels call the Sea of Galilee, and which Israelis call Kinneret, dropped to levels not seen in living memory. Long stretches of mud appeared where there had once been water. Two brothers from a nearby kibbutz, both amateur archaeologists, walked the exposed shore looking for old coins. What they found instead was the curve of a wooden plank, half buried, almost the same color as the surrounding mud. The boat that emerged over the following weeks of careful excavation was about 8.5 meters long and just over 2 meters wide. It was old. Radiocarbon dating placed its construction somewhere between the late 1st century before the Common Era and the late 1st century after. Pottery and a single oil lamp found in the mud beside it pointed to the same range. Most likely, the boat had been working the lake during the period when the Gospels say Jesus walked its shores. What made the boat remarkable was not just its age, it was the way it had been built. 12 different types of wood appeared in its construction. Cedar planks for the hull, oak frames, Aleppo pine, hawthorn, willow, redbud and others used in patches and repairs. This was not a finely crafted vessel, it was a working boat, the kind owned by a small fishing operation that could not afford to start from scratch when something cracked. Each repair was a record of a year, a season, a problem that needed solving with whatever wood could be found nearby. The boat had been used and patched for decades before its final journey. The Gospels describe boats like this one, small enough for 4 or 5 men to handle, large enough to carry a teacher and a dozen disciples across the lake, sturdy enough to survive sudden storms, but light enough to be hauled up onto a beach at the end of a day. The Galilee boat, as it is now called, sits in a climate-controlled hall at the Yigal Allon Center on the shore of the lake. It is the ghost of a working life, not Jesus's boat, almost certainly not, but a boat that fished the same waters in the same generation, owned by men who did the same work as Peter and Andrew and the sons of Zebedee. There is a detail about Galilean fishing that the Gospels assume and rarely explain. The lake supported a sophisticated industry. Salted fish from its shores were exported across the Mediterranean. The Greek name for the town of Magdala, just south of Capernaum, was Tarichaia, which means the place of salting. Magdala was a fish processing center. When the Gospels mention a woman from there, they are mentioning a woman from a town built on the smell of brine and the crack of split fish on stone tables. In 2009, construction crews preparing to build a guest house on the western shore of the lake, near the site of ancient Magdala, struck stone walls that should not have been there. Excavation revealed an entire 1st century synagogue, one of only a handful from that period ever found in the region. Its floor was laid with mosaics. Its benches lined the walls, and in the center of the room where it had been carefully placed sat a carved limestone block. The Magdala stone, as it is now called, is roughly the size of a small footstool. It is carved on all 4 sides and on its top. The carvings depict, among other things, a 7-branched menorah, a pair of amphorae, columns, a wheel-like rosette. The menorah is the oldest known depiction of the temple's 7-branched lampstand carved by someone who could have actually seen it. The temple was destroyed in the year 70. The synagogue at Magdala was buried under destruction debris from the same period. Whoever carved the stone was working before the temple fell, depicting an object that stood, at the time of carving, in a building only a few days' walk to the south. The stone seems to have functioned as a stand of some kind, possibly for a Torah scroll during readings. Its carvings are not decoration alone, they are theological geography. They place the temple in Jerusalem at the imaginative center of the synagogue at Magdala. They tell us that small-town Galilean Jews in the 1st century thought of themselves as connected by sight and memory to the temple cult, even when they were 150 kilometers away in their fishing village. The Gospels say Jesus taught in synagogues throughout Galilee. The plural is important. Not one synagogue, not just Capernaums. Magdala had one. The carved stone sat in it. A teacher walking the shore from Capernaum to Magdala would have passed through fish salting yards and into a stone room with a carved menorah at its center. The Gospel writers do not pause to describe these rooms. They expect their readers to know. 2 objects then. A patched fishing boat and a carved stone. Neither of them famous in their own time. Neither of them touched by the men whose names we remember. But both of them sat at the edges of the same small lake in the same generation, doing the ordinary work of feeding and praying. And both of them were preserved by accident. The boat by mud, the stone by ruin. The Gospels do not describe the boat or the stone, but the boat and the stone describe the world the Gospels assume. Chapter 6. What Rome wrote. What Rome forgot. Roman administrators did not, as a rule, take much interest in the religious enthusiasms of their eastern provinces. The empire managed something like 70 or 80 million people across 3 continents, and the bureaucratic attention of Rome was finite. Provinces produced grain, taxes, soldiers, and occasional rebellions. They did not produce, in the eyes of Roman archivists, theology worth recording. Most of what happened in Judea between the years 26 and 36 of the Common Era left no Roman paper trail. The crucifixion of a Galilean teacher would have been, from Pilate's office, a Friday's paperwork. And yet, by the early 2nd century, Roman writers were forced to mention the movement that grew out of that Friday. They mentioned it because it had become a problem. The earliest substantial Roman reference comes from Cornelius Tacitus. He was a senator, a former consul, and one of the finest historians the Roman world produced. He was not a friend of Christians. He was not interested in their claims. He was writing his annals, a careful and often bitter history of the early empire, around the year 116 of the Common Era. In Book 15, describing the Great Fire that destroyed much of Rome in the year 64 under Nero, Tacitus turns to the question of who was blamed. Nero, he writes, fastened the guilt on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. The founder of this name, Christus, had suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus. Tacitus then describes how the movement, suppressed for the moment, broke out again, not only in Judea where the mischief had begun, but even in Rome itself, and how Nero made the Christians scapegoats in particularly cruel ways. The passage is short, few sentences, but every word matters. Tacitus is not quoting a Christian source. He despises the movement. He calls its beliefs an abominable superstition, and yet he confirms several facts in passing. There was a man called Christus. He was executed under Tiberius. The man who executed him was Pontius Pilatus, governor of Judea. The execution did not end the movement. The movement spread to Rome within a generation. By 64, there were enough Christians in the imperial capital to serve as scapegoats for a fire. A small note about that title, procurator. Tacitus uses the term that was current in his own day, a generation after Pilate's actual rank as prefect. This is the kind of small anachronism that real historians make all the time. It is not the kind of mistake a Christian forger trying to fake a passage would make, because the Christian tradition itself preserved the word governor or hegemon, not procurator. Tacitus is writing from Roman administrative habit, not from the Gospels. The second major reference comes from Flavius Josephus, a Jewish priest and aristocrat who survived the war with Rome and ended up writing history in Greek under imperial patronage. His Antiquities of the Jews, completed around the year 93, contains 2 passages relevant to Jesus. The shorter and less disputed one mentions a man named James, the brother of Jesus who was called Christ. Josephus is describing the death of this James at the hands of a high priest named Ananus around the year 62. The reference is offhand. Josephus assumes his readers will know who Jesus is, or at least will not be confused by the name. He is interested in James's death because it caused a political problem in Jerusalem. The longer passage, called the Testimonium Flavianum, has been the subject of intense debate for centuries. As it stands in the surviving manuscripts, it contains several lines that no first-century Jewish priest writing for a Roman audience would have written. It calls Jesus the Messiah without qualification. It says he was perhaps more than a man. It mentions the resurrection as fact. These look like later Christian additions, slipped into the text by scribes who copied the manuscript across centuries. But strip those additions away, and what remains is a careful, neutral notice. There was a man named Jesus, a wise man, a teacher who attracted both Jews and Greeks. He was accused before Pilate and crucified. His followers did not abandon him, and the movement called Christians after him still existed at the time of Josephus's writing. An Arabic version of the passage, preserved by a 10th century historian named Agapius, and probably reflecting an earlier, less corrupted text, reads almost exactly like this stripped-down version. The bones of the reference appear authentic. Two non-Christian sources then, written by men who had no interest in promoting the movement, both mention Jesus. Both place him in Judea. Both connect him to Pilate. Both treat his execution as a known fact. This is more independent attestation than survives for many figures of comparable obscurity in the 1st century. There is a quieter Roman reference worth mentioning, from a letter sent around the year 112 by Pliny the Younger, who was governing Bithynia in northern Asia Minor. He writes to the Emperor Trajan asking for guidance on how to handle Christians who had been brought before him. He describes their practices. They meet on a fixed day before dawn. They sing a hymn to Christ as to a god. They take an oath not to commit theft or adultery. He is puzzled by them. He finds their stubbornness deserving of punishment, but their crimes hard to identify. The letter is administrative, weary, slightly bewildered. It is the tone of a Roman governor who has stumbled into a movement he did not ask to deal with. What Rome wrote about Jesus is not impressive. A few paragraphs scattered across decades, mostly hostile or indifferent. What Rome forgot is everything else. The procedural records of Pilate's tribunal, the tax rolls of Galilee, the names of the Roman soldiers stationed in Jerusalem during a particular Passover, all of it gone. But the few sentences that survive are enough to anchor the figure described by the Gospels in the world described by the Empire. Two systems were taking notes that decade. One was a small movement of Galileans who would eventually write 4 narratives. The other was an empire that kept its records on perishable scrolls in administrative offices that would burn. The empire forgot. The Galileans remembered. And the empire, when it finally bothered to look up from its ledgers, confirmed in passing what the Galileans had been saying all along. Chapter 7, the cloth, the quarry, and the question that remains this last chapter requires a different kind of care. The evidence here is genuinely uncertain. People have argued about it for centuries and will continue to argue about it. What follows is not advocacy. It is a careful look at what the cloth, the quarry, and the question actually are. Begin with the quarry. Beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the Christian quarter of Jerusalem lies a worked stone landscape. In the 1st century, this area sat outside the city walls. It had been a limestone quarry, abandoned by the time of Jesus, with several rock-cut tombs carved into its remaining cliff faces. The Gospels say Jesus was crucified at a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull, and buried in a new tomb belonging to a man named Joseph of Arimathea, in a garden near the place of execution. The geographical claim is specific: outside the walls, near a quarry, tombs nearby, in a garden which suggests cultivated ground around the abandoned stone face. For a long time, the location of the Holy Sepulchre Church seemed wrong. It sits well inside the modern walls of the old city. But the modern walls are not the 1st century walls. The expansion of Jerusalem under Herod Agrippa in the early 40s of the Common Era enclosed an area that had previously been outside. Excavations beneath and around the church confirm the picture: a 1st century quarry, tombs cut into its faces, a site that in the year 30 would have been a short walk outside the gate, exactly the kind of place Romans used for public executions. The tradition identifying this spot with the crucifixion goes back at least to the early 4th century, when the Emperor Constantine ordered a temple of Venus, built by Hadrian in the 2nd century, demolished and a church constructed in its place. Why Hadrian had built a temple of Venus, there is itself a small piece of evidence. Roman emperors sometimes built pagan temples on the holy sites of subject peoples to suppress veneration. The presence of a Venus temple over a remembered Christian holy site in the 2nd century suggests the memory was already strong enough, only 100 years after the events, to require imperial suppression. The site was not chosen by Constantine out of nothing. It was chosen because the local Christian community had been quietly remembering it for nearly 300 years. Now turn to the cloth. The Shroud of Turin is a linen sheet about 4.5 meters long. It bears, faintly, the image of a man, front and back, as if the body had been laid on one half of the cloth and the other half folded over the head. The man on the cloth is wounded. The wounds are precise and consistent with Roman crucifixion practice. Punctures around the scalp, lacerations across the back consistent with a flagrum, the Roman scourge with weighted tips, a wound in the side, wounds at the wrists, not the palms, which matches the actual Roman practice better than most medieval depictions of crucifixion did. The image is superficial. It rests on the topmost fibers of the linen, not soaking into the threads the way paint or dye would. No one has been able to reproduce it convincingly using medieval materials. In 1988, 3 independent laboratories radiocarbon dated samples of the cloth and concluded it had been made between 1260 and 1390. The result was widely reported as settling the question. The shroud was medieval. Case closed. In the years since, the picture has become more complicated. The samples used for the 1988 dating were taken from a single corner of the cloth, an area that had been visibly repaired during the Middle Ages after a fire. Subsequent textile analysis identified cotton fibers and a different weave pattern in that corner, suggesting the area sampled was a medieval rewoven patch, not original cloth. Whether a redating of an undamaged section would yield a different result is unknown. The Holy See has not authorized further testing. The radiocarbon question, in other words, is not closed. It is open. The Sudarium of Viedo is a smaller cloth, about 80 by 50 centimeters, kept in a cathedral in North Spain. It bears no image. It bears blood stains and serum stains, in a pattern consistent with a cloth that had been wrapped around the head of a crucified man for a period of time, then removed. Its documented history reaches back to at least the 7th century, when it was taken from Jerusalem during the Persian invasions and eventually carried to Spain. Forensic analysis of the bloodstains shows a pattern that, when laid against the head image of the Shroud of Turin, aligns at multiple points. The 2 cloths have not been argued by everyone to be from the same body, but the alignment is unsettling, and no one has proposed a satisfactory explanation for how a medieval forger of the shroud could have produced an image consistent with a cloth that was already in Spain centuries before the supposed forgery. This is where the careful pause matters. The shroud and the sudarium are not proof of the resurrection. They are not proof on their own, even of the crucifixion of Jesus specifically. They are pieces of physical evidence, of disputed origin, that resist easy explanation in either direction. The faithful sometimes claim too much for them. The skeptical sometimes claim too much against them. A genuinely honest position acknowledges that we do not yet know what they are. What we do know is that the early Christian movement made an extraordinary claim almost immediately. Within a few years of the crucifixion, in a letter Paul writes to the Corinthians around the year 54, he repeats a tradition he says was already established when he received it, that Christ died, was buried, and was raised on the 3rd day, that he appeared to Peter, then to the 12, then to more than 500 at once, most of whom, Paul says, were still alive at the time of his writing and could be questioned. The letter is not a late theological development. It is a first-generation document referring to an even earlier tradition. The historian Gerd Ludemann, who did not believe in the resurrection in any supernatural sense, nonetheless concluded that something happened in the days after the crucifixion that convinced Peter and others that they had encountered the risen Jesus. He treated those experiences as historically real, whatever their cause. Other historians have reached similar conclusions, while differing sharply on what might explain the experiences. The point is that the early proclamation of the resurrection is not a legend that grew slowly over generations. It is a claim made by named people, in named places, within years of the events. This last fact is what holds together everything that has come before in this script. The stone with Pilate's name, the ossuary with Caiaphas's name, the 5 porticos, the ritual pool, the basalt house, the patched boat, the carved stone, the few sentences of Tacitus and Josephus. None of these prove the central claim of the Christian faith. Archaeology cannot do that. But all of them, taken together, refuse to let the figure of Jesus float free of his world. He stood in a real province governed by a real prefect, was tried by a real high priest, taught in real synagogues, walked along a real lake, and was executed at a real quarry's edge. The world that produced him left fingerprints, and the fingerprints have, slowly, been brushed clean. What the listener does with that is not the work of the historian. The historian's work is to lay the evidence on the table and step back. The stone, the bone, the water, the wood, the cloth. They sit there, they do not argue, they simply remain. If you have stayed with this story to the end, there is a reason you have stayed. The evidence does not compel belief, it does compel attention. And if quiet, careful work like this is something you would like more of, your presence in the comments shapes what comes next more than you might expect. The ground keeps speaking. The question is whether we are willing to listen to what it says and to sit with the parts of the answer that have not yet arrived.